You've done all your good work now, but unfortunately, we need to fund the NHS, so we're going to be taking more money out of your paycheck. Oh no, the poor business owner has to pay more taxes on the surplus value they've exploited. Oh no, I'm so sad for you, Mrs. Business Owner. That's pretty Marxist for a GB News analyst. Very strange. And with further ado, I have no preamble for anything that I'm doing here, so I'm just going to get on with it. We're going to be watching some question time, going to be critiquing the crazy shit these people say. Anyone like to defend the Prime Minister? I wonder if they will. Not sure they will do, but whatever. Let's watch it, let's see, have a look and see how it goes.
Welcome to Question Time. Tonight we are in Morecambe. On tonight's panel, James Heapy, an officer in the army before becoming an MP. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan and is now the government's Minister for the Armed Forces. Labour's Shadow Business Secretary, previously Shadow Minister in several departments.
Oh, he was the one who was on Julia Hartley-Brewer's show on Talk Radio. The one who she called her an anti-vaxxer and she just fucking lost her shit. It's very funny.
Under both Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer. Jonathan Reynolds. Alison Phillips, journalist and editor of the Daily Mirror, which led the way in...
I love the editorialising there. Like, they had to specify that he wasn't just there under Keir Starmer. He's been tainted with the Corbyn brush. So, I don't know, might be a little bit sus.
Breaking stories of partying at number 10 during the pandemic. Entrepreneur and founder of her own IT company specialising in healthcare, and participant in TV programmes such as Secret Millionaire and The Apprentice You're Fired, Kavita Oberoi, and economist, author, former Moscow correspondent at The Economist, and GB News presenter Liam Halligan.
GB News and The Economist. Yuck.
Good evening. Welcome to my panel. Welcome to the audience here in Morecambe. Very nice to see you, and very nice to see you at home, of course, as well. Thank you for joining us, and do join in the conversation in the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. So, let's take our first question, which is from Rob Wiley.
Hi. With the cost of living crisis, should the national insurance rise be postponed?
Yes. Next question.
Which will be coming in April. What's your view, Rob?
I think it probably should be. There's a lot of people, especially in areas like this, as having their finances squeezed, and they're struggling as it is. We've got energy, fuel prices going through the roof, all that sort of thing. You'd be very lucky if you get a wage rise in this area that matches inflation. People who work full-time, long hours, not just 40-hour weeks, 50-hour weeks, 60-hour weeks, are struggling to make ends meet, and it's just, I think it could do with being held off.
I mean, the main part, the biggest reason is there's a regressive tax, and that it impacts everybody who works, regardless of how much they earn, and the percentage at which of your overall paycheck that it takes away is felt much harder by people who are on the lower end of the income spectrum. That's why it's really bad. If you want to raise money for the NHS, happily we'll see you engaging in tax rises. Make sure you're targeting people who actually earn a lot of money rather than people who are on fucking 16.5k.
Well, Cabinet agreed to do it, and I think it was the right decision to take, given that the point of it is to raise money that is much needed to both address the iniquity of social care provision in this country and the waiting lists that have built up during the pandemic that we need to address within the NHS.
You've got a number of Conservative MPs now saying that it should be delayed, not least the head of the Treasury Select Committee, a former minister. Do you think that line will hold?
Well, look, I mean, I think you'll have noticed that the top of the government is in listening mode at the moment, but the Cabinet took the decision, and I think that it's important to recognise that actually, as a tax, it will, I think, sort of 50% of the revenue is raised by the top 14% of taxpayers, and there's 6 million people that pay nothing at all.
Good. Tax them even more. I do not care about what percentage of tax they pay from the overall tax burden. What I actually care about is how they're actually going to get materially impacted by the tax policies that you push, and an additional rise on the highest earners to further fund the NHS is going to have much less of an impact than if you take away, 200 quid away from someone who's earning like the average wage.
So, it isn't the blunt instrument that some people have described it as. But I know, and it's the same for all of us, that prices are rising quickly. There is a challenge to how we make ends meet. And we're fortunate to have, I think, on the panel, jobs that pay pretty well. But there are plenty of people that are on good salaries that are starting to worry about how they're going to make things meet. And the government is seeking to address that, both through interventions in the energy market.
Then why are you raising the fucking taxes, you stupid bellend?
and £500 million
Right, man, okay,
for
dude.
those who are really struggling to help with their bills and cost of living. But
So
it's, we're going to need to do a lot, I think.
Well, no, they have journalists, politicians, and/or public figures. So yeah, no, there are no normal humans on Question Time ever. Like the closest like to normal human I've seen is like when they have like power sleeves, I guess.
Over the next few years to help people with this.
Alison.
Well, I think Rob's hit the nail on the head in that we're looking at a really, really tough sort of winter going into spring ahead. You know, inflation 6%, and then this, and then energy bills. I mean, that is going to come as a horrible shock to people fairly shortly. You know, ordinary families, they're going to be looking at something like £500 extra per year on their energy bills. So it's going to be particularly difficult for those that are least well off, but it's going to be really tough, I think, for everybody in this country. And we're now looking at this, the national insurance hike, which was decided on back in September, when inflation wasn't looking...
Yeah, because she works for like a newspaper for normal people, The Mirror, rather than the fucking Times. Or there's a guy from fucking... There's like someone from The Economist and someone from fucking... He himself is from The Economist and GB News. So it's like fucking like a shower of cunts.
As bad as it is now, which we're now looking at 6%, things have got considerably worse in the interim. And I think when I talk to sort of our readers, Mirror readers, sort of... what their main concern that can make is it doesn't sort of feel very fair, because this also, of course, is much harder on younger people. It's much harder on people on lower incomes as well. And there are other ways that this money could be raised. Yes, we need to address shortages in the NHS. Yes, we need to sort out, finally, social care. But this doesn't seem to have been the fairest way to do it. And something has to be...
It doesn't seem to be. It's categorically not the fairest way to do it. Come on, be a little bit more forthright with your condemnation of this shitty policy change.
All right. Got a few hands up. Yes, the one here.
Yeah, the hike in the national insurance is 1.5%. You're saying
1.25.
Yeah. 1.25, which
percentage points actually.
Well,
which is different from percentage.
Yeah, which is small when you think about the rise in inflation, and that rise in inflation doesn't take into account the real cost to people on low incomes. Because when you actually look at that and the things that they buy, the non-electric guitars and all the stuff that they put in that to get to that figure, the lower price goods in the supermarket, so that inflation is even higher. So in light of that, if they do delay it, 1.25% as opposed to everything else that's going on, and the energy bills that are going to be horrendous, and people aren't getting rises. The pensioners have been, done over again with the triple lock, and there are lots of people like...
Oh, shut the fuck about pensions. I can give a shit about people who literally have more expendable income. They're like people from the pension ages above spend more on non-housing consumption than fucking millennials do, right? Like, I understand that there are poor pensioners who have difficulty paying for social care, and that should be covered by a national care service. 100% agree, absolutely. But pensioners moaning about bills going up, fuck off.
Like the gentleman says, especially in this area, they're on very low incomes and they're going to really, really suffer. So the 1.25%, yeah, needs looking at, but that isn't the whole picture. There's an awful lot more there.
Okay. The one here in the grey sweater.
So against this backdrop, some years ago, Liz Truss said...
I'm going to sound like such a bellend for saying this, right? But I genuinely think, Waitrose aren't that much more expensive if you buy their own brand stuff nowadays. And, it's technically part of some sort of cooperative. So the people who work there at least get some remuneration from what you spend there, rather than just being completely milked for their surplus value, right? So it's more ethical to shop at Waitrose than it would be to shop at Sainsbury's, where things cost basically the same anyway. Obviously, if you have to shop at Aldi or Lidl, you have to shop at Aldi or Lidl. I'm not gonna impugn someone for having to go to the cheapest places, and at least Aldi and Lidl pay well, right? Just don't shop at Asda.
The public sector workers should take personal responsibility for the money they spend and save. Does the panel think that Liz Truss should take personal responsibility for the private jet she flew to Australia at an estimated cost of £500,000?
Yeah, mine's usually Co-op, Tesco, or Lidl.
Pounds to the taxpayer.
Yes, you just very quickly want to deal with that, because that's been in the news tonight. So this is a flight that Liz Truss took as Foreign Secretary to Australia. It was a government Airbus, as opposed to your regular, Qantas or British Airways, whatever it might be. And it is reported to have cost something like £500,000.
Well, I mean,
Value for money?
Well, I read the story, and I think what happened is another operator of private aviation has said it would cost £500,000. I think if it's already a jet that's leased by the government, I expect it probably didn't cost that.
So how much did it cost?
But I don't know the operation.
Regardless of whether it costs like £500,000 or some other kind of weird obscene amount of money, just like having a private jet to ferry your pretty fucking mediocre cabinet minister over to fucking Australia when you could just do it by Zoom call. Now that is just a waste of that is a waste of taxpayers' money. People go on about having diversity initiatives in the NHS or whatever when people are fucking paying huge amounts of money to private jet people literally across the fucking world, the other side of the fucking world. Nah, mate. Waste.
National security concerns that went into her deciding to travel privately. But I read the same story.
Do you approve?
It did cost $500,000. Well,
True, like Waitrose, like cakes and shit, like absolutely perfect, so good.
last week I flew to Kiev on a...
Or if you go to like M&S Food, Simply Food, they do this little like pots of like mini bites, whatever, and they get like the Rocky Road ones, like the pink tub. Oh, so good, so good.
Private RAF operated flight because the security and operational situation required me to fly on an RAF private plane to Kiev on the job that I was doing and the people I was flying with, because the stuff we were going to do was sensitive. So, having flown on a private plane myself in the last 10 days, that's quite hypocritical of me to criticise.
But if they do that, it's disappointing, because I do love those Rocky Road mini bites, but no ethical consumption and all that.
She was going to Australia. She wasn't going to Kiev, was she?
I don't know what the security concerns are.
Let's get back to the subject. And then here in the blue shirt.
Thank you. I was fortunate enough to be in a school this morning, and I came across a lady who, I won't say anything, but she was employed by the school to do the cleaning. At the beginning of COVID, she was employed to go around cleaning chairs, tables, doorstops. She was in tears today because she was opening up to a colleague that she didn't have enough to make ends meet. So she's one of those people, it's a terrible expression, is just about managing. And she hasn't got enough food to put on the table, as well as the energy, as well as the food price increases and national insurance. And she works hard.
And you think it should be delayed?
And she was like, this time 2 years ago, she was a fucking key worker. She was like, all clap for key workers. Let's all congratulate them for the hard jobs that they do, keeping the fucking country running, doing essential jobs during a pandemic, like being able to sanitize a whole fucking school, right? Literal, like, things that you cannot do without in a society. And then now they come along and say, well, actually, you've done all of your good work now, but unfortunately, we need to fund the NHS, so we're going to be taking more money out of your paycheck. It's bananas. It's just a stupid idea to have. It's so fucking regressive as a taxation policy. If you want to be able to fund the NHS, like absolute nonsense, especially with the price of cost of living going up, energy prices increasing, like just basic food price increase. If you looked at the Jack Monroe thread, now the ONS are changing the way that they look at overall pricing with regards to this because of the thread that they posted on Twitter. Right? It's ridiculous, utterly ridiculous, right? It's so fucking hypocritical considering what they were talking about with key workers at the start of the pandemic. That fucking ended quickly, didn't it?
Absolutely, I should. I know we've got a huge budget.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be delayed. And if the government are so desperate for money, why did Rishi Sunak write off the furlough debt as quickly as he did?
True.
Obviously, this national insurance rise affects employees, but also employers.
It does affect employers.
I do agree, Malak, and I think that if one thing that we need to be more likely to be able to do as a country is what we need to do is things like growing our own vegetables and relying on seasonal veg rather than just expecting to have all of our posh fruits and veg flown in from Tunisia or Costa Rica, right? I absolutely get that, and I think you're 100% that's fine, but that doesn't mean that that there needs to be more social housing. It doesn't mean that landlords aren't a problem, etc. But then there are plenty of countries that aren't Britain who don't deal with the issues that we do, right? Like the specific things that, with regards to these economic situations that are difficult, are a product of neoliberal reforms of the 80s that have changed the way in which we look at, price of living, the cost of things we consume, like commodities, and also especially the cost of housing, right? Like, I understand that, especially if you look at places like Cuba or whatever, people live in the same household as their parents for plenty of years, right? But that, I think, for the way in which kind of our society functions and the way in which our social interactions function, having that long-term constraint just doesn't really gel with society as much. And places like Vienna, places like Germany, these places can handle it, but why can't we, right?
As well. I mean, I definitely agree that it should be delayed, especially as the cost of borrowing is lower than expected.
I mean, certainly hyper-individualism is definitely cancer. I 100% agree.
At the moment, and it affects employers as well. It affects businesses because we're having to pay increased taxes, and businesses have gone through.
Oh no, the poor business owner has to pay more taxes on the surplus value they've exploited. Oh no, I'm so sad for you, Mrs. Business Owner.
tough time over the last couple of years, and again with the energy rises. I mean, I also run a serviced office business. We've got 20,000 square feet, and it's been absolutely shocking in terms of some of the rises that we've seen just in the last month in terms of our bills, and we can't just go ahead and suddenly start increasing prices, so you're feeling that squeeze all the time. So it impacts.
Yeah, how about take less profit, right? Just stop taking as much profit and pass those savings on to the consumer.
Impacts everyone, but I absolutely agree that it should be delayed.
True, they did. That's true.
You're nodding your head there, Jonathan.
I think there's no question it should be delayed. I mean, you've got a situation, and people clearly are already aware of it, where every household in the country, and for pensioners as well, are facing a real terms pay cut. You have a situation in energy bills which is close to unprecedented.
And if anything is the backbone of the London economy, it is fried chicken shops that are open until 3 a.m, right?
Heading towards £2,000. The government needs to help people with those factors, and at the minute it's actually going to make it worse by putting up the taxes. You're right to say it's a rise of 1.25 percentage points. It's actually a 10% rise overall, so it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. But I also want to say,
without that increase, so how is the government going to pay for NHS backlog for health and social? Where's the money going to come from?
Absolutely. So the point is, first of all, it doesn't go to social care, and I resent the fact it's been presented that way. It's at least 3 years, probably never, that it will go to social care. So that is deliberately misleading.
So the question was, where should the money come from?
And if you're going to raise money this way, and I think you should raise money for the NHS, it's got to be a fair way of doing so. It should affect all forms of income, people who get income from property, from shares, as well.
No, it should just fucking rich people. That's where that money should come from. But he's right that the way in which we've just kind of only look at income tax, and we've never looked at fucking capital gains or a land value tax for a huge amount of time, and the way our taxation system works, it is a damning indictment of how regressive it is in general.
As well as working people, it's far too narrow.
So a rise in income tax, is that what you're suggesting?
I think there's a range of options that are available. There's a range of taxes that would raise that revenue. But to do it this way and think people aren't going to realise because it's called national insurance rather than another form of tax, it's playing the public for fools, and I think they're onto it.
Charities have already shown in the last quarter that the use of food banks can't cope anymore. So does this mean children will go to school hungry?
Man in the grey jacket.
Where we're talking about people struggling financially, when are we going to see some real investment in towns like Morecambe?
The one here with the scarf, yes.
It needs delaying because the household fund, the 500 million household fund, also runs out on the 31st of March. That came in because of the £20 universal credit was taken away by the government. It's take. That's another amount of money being taken off of people. I spoke to somebody from the Citizens Advice, and they've told me that the food banks are supposed to be there for emergencies. In Morecambe, every day is an emergency for a lot of families, so you need to sit up and take note.
Oh no, but we can't be relying on the nanny state, can you? Or pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Doesn't matter that the area you live in is massively underfunded and has been completely left destitute by, running Conservative councils who've not bothered trying to regenerate the area that you live in. It's none of those problems. It's just because you haven't done the individual things that you need to do to be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get back where you need to be. Come on, take some individual responsibility.
Well, Rob's absolutely right, of course. There is a triple whammy coming in terms of the cost of living. You've got energy bills. The energy price cap's probably going to go up above £2,000. That's for the average household, from around £1,200 now. An enormous increase. You've got not just these NIC rises coming in April, but also the freezing of the basic rate tax bracket, which means as we have inflation, more people are dragged into that. And the lady here is exactly right. The CPI, Consumer Price Index inflation measure, is 5.4%. Real inflation is much higher than that. The old RPI that we used to use is 7.2%, and actual inflation, if a big chunk of what you spend is spent on necessities like food and fuel, is much higher. Now, delaying this rise in NICs, let me tell you, it's absolutely possible and makes a lot of sense. Not my words. The words of Professor Jajit Chadha, who runs the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, the UK's most respected and long-standing economic think tank. He said that on my GB News show this lunchtime.
Which is a marvellous plug for your show. But where's he suggesting the money comes from?
We don't get massive state subsidies, so we have to take our chances, Fiona. There is fiscal headroom to do this.
What a cheap shot. Where's he suggesting the money comes from?
It's a £3.5 billion shot.
Liam, where's he suggesting the money should come from then?
He's saying that if you shelve it, you'll get more growth, because this is a tax on jobs, as a lot of the audience have said. Paul Johnson, who runs the Institute for Fiscal...
It's a tax on what it is a tax on the people who consume the most in society, right? The people who consume the most are the people who earn the least. Because they can't save up money. They're not looking to any kind of high ticket purchase anytime soon. Every time the paycheck in it just goes, they spend. So this, by removing money from the people who are most likely to then put that back into the economy, that's negative economic thinking, right? It doesn't make any sense. Whereas all of these billionaires and all of these rich people, these business owners that have increased their profits however many times over the course of the pandemic in the kind of sectors that had better benefit of the economic, they reaped the economic benefits of kind of what happened during the pandemic and how lockdowns affect the economy. These people will just end up, using that money to put into stock options, or going to be in other capital gains, or investing in property, and that doesn't drive the economy. That doesn't go back. That doesn't trickle down to the people who then spend that money put that money back into the economy in the first place, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. It's completely pointless.
Studies, you'll hear about them when we row over numbers during election campaigns. Massively respected. He says there is the fiscal headroom to do this. The trouble we've got now is that there is far too much tax, I would say, on people's work, on their labour, particularly at the lower end of the income.
I mean, relative to their income, and also overall within society, right? There's so many more of them, and they do so much more consumption in general. Obviously, on an individual level, someone with who earns 25k is not going to spend as much money as someone who earns 60k. But the sum total of the people who earn 21k in the country are going to have an overall total spending that's more, right? If you catch my drift, but also relative to their income as well, metaphysical
income spectrum. There's not nearly enough taxation, I would say. I like low taxes in general, but we should be taxing more unearned wealth rather than the people's work with their hands, getting up every day with their life.
So is that people who sell their labour power rather than people who make money off of owning stuff rather than working? Are you making a distinction based on people's relationship to the means of production there? That's pretty Marxist for a GB News analyst. Very strange.
Alarm clocks to go to tough jobs. And I've got huge respect for the Mirror and Alison Phillips. She's a fantastic journalist, and maybe it was a slip of the tongue, but I don't think this cost of living rise is going to be really hard for everybody. I don't think there's going to be a real terms pay cut, Jonathan, with due respect again for every household in the country. A lot of the laptop classes have done really well during lockdown. They're not paying money on trains. It's been cheaper for them. They spent a lot more time working at home because they don't work in factories. They don't have customer-facing jobs. So I do think there's a case, and I say this with some reservation, but we are now in a situation where I wouldn't be taxing people at the lower end of the income spectrum, basic rate taxpayers raising their national insurance contributions. If we do need more money, I'd get it from growth and also more tax on unearned income.
All here in the brown second.
Great, cool. Tax the bourgeois. Absolutely, I'm down with you, Mr. GB News, Mr. Economist. Absolutely, let's do it. The fact that he managed to draw a distinction between earned and unearned income, that's so like anti-liberal, right? As a position with which one with which one might take, right? Yet he won't clarify that distinction unless he sounds like a Marxist. But when he talks about the laptop class, I think he just means basically anyone who doesn't do manual labour, right? Which is what a lot of kind of like pseudo-Marxists would call PMC in that case. Like, I think there's a reasonable section of the economy that you could call PMC, but I don't think it's a particularly useful turn of phrase personally. But I think he just means people who work in offices, right? White collar versus blue collar, etc.
I earn just above the Northwest average wage. I'm a single female with no dependents, but all I ever hear is this will affect families, and we will look at a package that will help families and the low paid. And I feel like it's you stand in the corner with your purse open and we'll all dib in and you can have what's left. When is something going to be done for forgotten minorities to include us? We are part of the electorate. We pay our taxes.
Right. Well, in a pink and purple there, yes.
I'd just like to point out that this very building that we're in, up until last summer, was the food bank. This hall, you can see how big it is, was stuffed with food, and that was in July. It then moved out to another building somewhere else. But the point is, the need has gone up. So can you imagine this place was filled with food for the food families of Morecambe? This is what they needed, and that was before this major crisis hit. It has got significantly worse. And we're not talking about people who are sitting there with their hands out waiting for free food. They are people who are generally working. The majority of our clients in those days were working.
Come here and start there.
Well, not that I care about that distinction, but that is also true. And the amount of people who need in-work benefits at the moment, whether it be through cash payments topped up by universal credit, or whether it be people who have to go to food banks to be able to feed their children, we are subsidising poor incomes from the governmental level, and it has to stop.
How can we even be talking about raising national insurance when the figures, the percentages are bandied around left, right and centre? And as you were speaking about, we're talking about this huge raise in inflation, and at 5.4%, I think you mentioned. But the lived experience of people here doesn't sound anything like that number. If we're going to start asking the public to pay more, shouldn't all the figures that we use be accurately assessed and credible? Because people will do things and support things if they know they're based on a true assessment of the facts. And that inflationary figure does not represent what people here are feeling.
So, James, you're not getting a lot of support in the room for the national insurance rise. I think it's a fair summation of what I'm hearing. You said the government's in listening mode, which I think is you softening us up for saying it may well in fact get delayed after all. If you're a betting man, would you say it's going to get delayed?
Look, I'm not going to go there because it's not for me to say, and I'm not privy to the conversations. But I mean, I don't think there's a majority. I think it is absolute. Everybody in the room is against it. Everybody in the room is
that fair?
feeling the squeeze.
Are you all against it?
Yeah. Everybody at home is feeling the squeeze. You know, what I hear here in Lancashire, I hear in Somerset too. I think
so. Why go through?
Well, I think government is looking at what other interventions it can make. I think that the tone of what we've been hearing so far is that whereas Labour have, say, cut VAT on fuel, which actually is a value-added tax, and therefore people with the biggest heating bills make the biggest saving, government's been saying, well, let's make a more targeted intervention.
Don't accept that.
Well, don't accept it, but the tone of what government has been saying so far has been around
if your energy bill is a
interventions
massive
for those
part
who
of what
need
you
it
spend
most.
every week, 5% off your energy bill is a very big deal, James.
I'm not disputing that, but the point is that I think the government has been looking, instead of universal measures, at actually things that target those who are most hard-pressed. Now, debate whether or not that's the right approach. We're sitting up and listening exactly as one of the questioners said that we must. But government has set out a view about how it wants to deal with this, and instead of it being universal measures...
I hate you, Malik. I'm not going to unsee that. I'm so... Not funny.
Which have their merits, gone down a different track.
OK, all right, I'm just...
The Labour policy is to cut VAT on bills so everyone would have some benefit because everyone needs some relief, and to increase the scope and eligibility for warm homes discounts so the people in the most need would get the most help. The reason the government aren't doing it is they're trying to save the Prime Minister rather than focus on the things that really matter. That's the bottom line.
I'm going to move on. But before I do, I just want to tell you that next week we will be in London.